You wake up at 3 a.m. with a pounding headache, and your hand automatically reaches for a bottle of ibuprofen on the nightstand. You don't think twice about it. You swallow the pill, roll over, and go back to sleep. But strip away that little orange bottle, strip away the pharmacy, the factory, the entire modern medical system, and you're left with something startling. Humans have been treating pain, infection, and disease for over 60,000 years, long before anyone knew what a virus was, long before anyone had ever seen a bacterium. So how did they do it? And more unsettling, how much of what they figured out turned out to be right? Here's where it gets strange almost immediately. In 1960, archaeologists excavating a Neanderthal burial site in Shanidar Cave, Iraq, found something that didn't fit the primitive caveman narrative at all. Pollen analysis of the grave, led by archaeologist Ralph Selecki, revealed clusters of yarrow, cornflower, and other flowering plants surrounding the body. Species still used in folk medicine today for their anti-inflammatory properties. The interpretation has been debated for decades. Some researchers argue the pollen blew in by accident. Others argue it's evidence of intentional burial with medicinal plants. But here's the detail that keeps this theory alive. Those exact plant species have measurable pharmacological effects. Someone, 60,000 years ago, may have understood that certain plants do something to the human body. But wait, understanding that a plant does something is a long way from medicine as we'd recognize it. So when does trial and error start to look like actual knowledge? Fast forward to 2012, and the answer gets a lot more concrete. Researchers led by Karen Hardy analyzed dental plaque from Neanderthal remains in Spain and found microscopic traces of chamomile and yarrow, plants with almost no nutritional value but well-documented bitter medicinal properties. Why would anyone eat something bitter and non-nutritious unless they knew on some level that it helped? That single detail flips the whole story. This wasn't blind luck. This was pattern recognition passed down, tested, and repeated across generations, long before anyone could write it down. Now here's the part nobody talks about. Plants were only step one. The real leap came when ancient humans started keeping records of what worked and what didn't. Around 1550 BCE in Egypt, someone compiled the Ebers Papyrus, a scroll roughly 20 meters long containing over 700 medical prescriptions and remedies. It reads like a strange hybrid of pharmacy manual and spell book. Instructions for treating wounds with honey, which we now know has genuine antibacterial properties because of its low water content and hydrogen peroxide production. Recommendations for moldy bread applied to infections, decades before anyone had heard the word penicillin. And, right alongside those, incantations to ward off demons believed to cause disease. It's tempting to laugh at the demon part. But here's the twist: separating the real medicine from the magic misses the point entirely. To the ancient Egyptian mind, there was no separation. Illness was both a physical and spiritual event, and treatment addressed both at once. That same blending of science and belief shows up almost everywhere you look in the ancient world, which raises an uncomfortable question. If a treatment worked, did it matter whether the person prescribing it understood why? But what about the exceptions? The cases where ancient medicine looks less like wisdom and more like horror. Trepanation is the answer. Archaeologists have found thousands of ancient skulls, from Peru to France to China, with deliberate holes carved, scraped, or drilled into them, some dating back over 7,000 years. And here's the detail that stops people cold. Many of these skulls show evidence of bone regrowth around the hole, meaning the patient survived the procedure, sometimes by years, sometimes by decades. Researchers studying Peruvian Trepan skulls found survival rates as high as 80% in some later Inca-era samples, a success rate that, frankly, rivals skull surgery outcomes from the early 1800s in Europe. Ancient surgeons were likely treating skull fractures, relieving pressure from swelling, or, in some documented cultural contexts, attempting to release what they believed were evil spirits causing seizures or migraines. Wrong theory. Right instinct. Sometimes that's all it takes. So if trial and error alone can produce a working brain surgery technique, what happens when a whole civilization starts organizing that trial and error systematically? That's where Hippocrates comes in, around 400 BCE in ancient Greece. Before him, illness in the Greek world was still largely attributed to the whims of the gods. Apollo sending plague, punishment for moral failure. Hippocrates proposed something almost rebellious for his time. Disease had natural causes, not divine ones. He and his followers developed the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, believing that illness came from an imbalance between them. It's completely wrong by modern standards, but the method behind it wasn't. Hippocratic physicians observed patients, tracked symptoms over time, documented outcomes, and refined their approach based on results. That's the scientific method in embryonic form, sitting right there in 400 BCE, wrapped in a completely incorrect theory of body fluids. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Some of those same physicians prescribed willow bark tea for pain and fever. Willow bark contains salicin, the direct chemical ancestor of aspirin. They had no concept of chemistry. They just noticed it worked, wrote it down, and passed it forward for 2,000 years, until a German chemist finally isolated the active compound in 1897, and modern medicine caught up to a folk remedy that was already ancient. But here's where the story takes a darker turn, because not every ancient treatment holds up under scrutiny. For every willow bark, there's a mercury tonic. Ancient Chinese emperors, obsessed with immortality, consumed mercury-laced elixirs prescribed by court alchemists, and historians widely believe this practice contributed to the deaths of at least 2 emperors, including Qin Shi Huang, the very ruler who unified China and built the Terracotta Army, reportedly poisoned by the very pills meant to make him live forever. In ancient Rome, physicians used bloodletting to balance the humors, a practice that persisted for nearly 2,000 years and likely weakened far more patients than it ever saved. Ancient medicine wasn't a straight line toward truth. It was a chaotic, uneven mix of accidental brilliance and confident, dangerous error, and the terrifying part is that both were delivered with exactly the same level of certainty. That contrast, genius and catastrophe, coming from the same impulse to heal, is really the whole story of ancient medicine in miniature. A healer in Mesopotamia grinding herbs by torchlight did not know she was decoding chemistry. A surgeon in the Andes cutting into a skull did not know he was practicing neurosurgery. A physician in Athens boiling willow bark did not know he was 2,000 years ahead of a laboratory in Germany. They were not scientists, they were watchers. They watched their patients live and they watched their patients die, and slowly, painfully, one buried skull and one scraped scroll at a time, they built the foundation that every hospital on Earth still stands on today. Now here's the part that lingers long after the facts fade. Almost everything we call modern medicine started as someone's desperate guess. Which brings us back to that 3 a.m. headache. The ibuprofen bottle on your nightstand, the reflex you don't even think about. The chemical inside that pill blocks the same inflammatory pathway that willow bark blocked for a Greek physician 24 centuries ago. The honey your grandmother might dab on a cut still works through the same antibacterial mechanism an Egyptian scribe recorded on papyrus 3,500 years ago. Somewhere in the design of every hospital, every prescription, every clinical trial, there's a trace of a Neanderthal chewing bitter yarrow in a cave, betting, without any way of knowing for certain, that it would help. They didn't have microscopes. They had observation, memory, and desperation. And it turns out that was enough to start something extraordinary. If you enjoyed this deep dive into where medicine really began, the next question worth asking is, how much of what we consider settled science today will look just as strange to people 3,000 years from now?